Section 6.2, Writing Decimals and Fractions as Percents. Before we begin this section, I just want to remind you of what the word percent means. Remember, percent means how many out of 100. Knowing that, if we're going to change from decimal to percent, let's work on a few of these. If I give you the decimal 0.7, well, 0.17, I meant to say, 0.17 is said as 17 hundredths. Well, if percent means how many out of 100, 0.17 is equal to 17%. If you are given the decimal 0.05, that written as a fraction would be 5 hundredths, because that's how you would say that as a decimal. So 5 hundredths would be the fraction, and since percent means how many out of 100, that would be equal to 5%. Let's do one more. If you were given 0.63, that is the decimal 63 hundredths. 63 hundredths as a percent would just be 63%. So let's take a look at these. Once again, notice that the numbers are the same. Here I have 17, here I have 17, here I have a 5, here I have a 5, here I have a 63, here I have a 63. But this time, rather than moving the decimal point 2 spots to the left, we're moving the decimal point 2 spots to the right. If I move the decimal point in 0.17 2 spots to the right, it becomes after the 7. And there's an understood decimal point in the whole number 17. I'll do the same thing. I'll move this decimal point 2 spots to the right. There's an understood decimal point after the 5. In 0.63, if I move the decimal point 2 spots to the right, I end up at 63. So changing from decimal to percent is really easy. Rather than moving the decimal point 2 spots to the left, you're going to move the decimal point, and I'll abbreviate decimal point DP, 2 spots to the right when you are changing from decimal to percent. So let's just take a look at a few other ones then. If you were given 0.095, and now that is a decimal. If I wanted to change that into a percent, I'm going to move the decimal point 2 spots to the right. So it would be 9.5%. If I was given 0.6, and if I wanted to change that into a percent, I'm going to move the decimal point 2 spots to the right. I move it 1 spot, but then I need to add a 0 to that so that I can move it 2 spots. So 0.6 is the same thing as 60%. Looking at one more, if I have 4.4 written as a decimal, if I wanted to change that into a percent, I'm going to have to move the decimal point 2 spots to the right. I move it 1 spot, I'm going to have to add a 0 to move it another spot. 4.4 written as a percent is 440%. Just remember, whenever you are going to change from a decimal to a percent, that you are going to move the decimal point 2 spots to the right, and you will have your answer. So, how about fractions? If you are given a fraction and you need to change that into a percent, in order to do that, let's go through a problem. If I give you the fraction 3/4, well, you need to change 3/4 into a decimal so we can use that same rule. So I'm going to divide 3 divided by 4. When I do that, I have to put a decimal point after the 3, and I'm going to say, how many sets of 4 are there in 30? There are 7. 4 times 7 gives me 28. I'll subtract, I get 2. I need to bring down another 0. How many sets of 4 are there in 20? There are 5. 4 times 5 gives me 20, so I get 0. So 3/4 as a decimal is 0.75. Now I'm just going to use that same rule that we just talked about. I'm going to move the decimal point 2 spots to the right, and I am going to get 75%. So the fraction 3/4 as a percent is equal to 75%. Let's look at another example. Let's say that you were given the fraction 1/6 and asked to change that into a percent. We're going to go through exactly the same process. We're going to divide 1 divided by 6. In order to do that, I'm going to have to put a decimal point after the 1 and put down a 0 and then say how many sets of 6 are there in 10. Well, there's 1. 6 times 1 is 6. I subtract, I get a 4. Do not forget to put the decimal point up in your answer, so it's 0.1 something. Now I'm going to have to put a 0 and drop it. How many sets of 6 are there in 40? Well, there are 6. 6 times 6 is 36. I subtract, I get 4. I bring down another 0. You might see here that this is going to continue. It's going to be a repeating decimal. So 1/6 as a decimal is 0.16 with a line over it. But I need to change this into a percent. So remember that with that line over it, it's really 0.166666. I could go on forever and ever. I'm going to move that decimal point over 2 spots to the right. When I do that, I get 16.6, and that 6 continues, so I would put a line over that last 6, and 1/6 as a fraction would be 16.6 with a line over the 6%. So how about a mixed number? I have 3 4/5, and I need to change the mixed number 3 4/5 into a decimal. I'm just going to have to worry about changing the 4/5 into a decimal because it's going to be 3 point something. So as I go through and do that, I am going to go through my division process. 5 goes into 40 8 times. 5 times 8 gives me 40. So I know that 4/5 is equal to 0.8. So 3 4/5 as a decimal is 3.8. Now I need to change that into a percent. I'm going to move the decimal point over 2 spots. In order to move it over 2 spots, I'm going to have to add a 0 after the 8. So I'm going to get 380%. So that means that 3 4/5, the mixed number is 380% as a decimal. Just like with the previous sections, this section gives you a lot of additional practice on changing fractions into decimals, which you worked on during earlier math courses. Just remember, when changing from a decimal to a percent, that the decimal point gets moved 2 places to the right. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.